Good afternoon, and thank you. And it's hard to follow lunch, so everyone I know is a little sleepy, so try and keep it exciting. But HF-3 really takes a new light from compared to looking at HF-1 and HF-2. Instead of being really focused on either a specific area, a single topic or media, HF-3 is kind of a cumulative look. It's a holistic approach at being good stewards and good neighbors. So these are some of the topics that are covered under HF-3. You can see the list is very long, very broad, but it's focused also beyond just hydraulic fracturing. While these practices do impact hydraulic fracturing, it goes into all the aspects of our development. Starting in wide-scale development, we've heard it said already today, the new areas shale gas has opened up are really areas that haven't seen development on this level, on this scale in a long time, if ever. I heard it from a gentleman from Pittsburgh, it was last week, where he said that basically shale gas in the Marcellus was the equivalent of steel, and we heard that echoed again at lunch today. And with that, you have to go and take a new look on cumulative impacts. No longer is it just a single well, but it's what is the impact on the entire community? What do our operations bring in? What are the stresses? But also, we really have to work to communicate what are the benefits of our development. And with that, you can also join with the regional collaborations, Marcellus Shale, these are just a few up here examples, National Petroleum Council, to take what is specific to the region. When API began working on these guidance documents, it was recognized quite quickly that writing them at a national level meant that they were being written at a higher level, and not everything was applicable to each region, but you can also look at what each different play is doing, learn, see how you can benefit it and twist it to fit your operations and implement it. And that is what these regional collaborations are best at. And also we've seen in some of the recent reports, there's been a lot of call for these exact centers, each with a slightly different name, all the same general emphasis. With surface impacts, as it was said, it's not just what that well does, but it's all of operations, the actual presence of opportunity that has an impact. And the stakeholder engagement is key. You have to work, if you open up that dialogue, we address a lot of the fears that are out there, the basic concerns that people have. When you do the polls, I think API has done them, and it's, about 3/4 of the people truly they're concerned about it, but they're not against it. They just want information. I spent on the plane ride here, I'm out of Denver, for 3 hours discussing with the gentleman next to me just basic questions about our operations. And so it's with stakeholder engagement, you open up that dialogue, you allow an opportunity for operators to explain what they're going to be doing, what the impacts may be, how they will address them, and it also gives the public an opportunity to comment and express their concerns and hopefully alleviate them. This will also benefit as it will lower the amount of time on permitting aspects. You won't have the public outcry or the issues. If everyone's comfortable with it, you often can get things through easier. You can get your agreements to get right of ways. You have a lot of benefits from a community that is supportive. One of the things Anadarko has begun doing is we just hold routine neighborhood meetings, and it's, whatever the hot topic of that time is. We also bring in here, as Brian had mentioned earlier, the baseline water quality. We bring up items that we've seen in our sampling and discuss it and just try and get a general level of communication. Another key aspect is site selection and planning. And a lot of this seems to be kind of intuitive when we do our operations. We live under a lot of what HF-3 is every day. It's second nature. But with site selection, we have seen that with horizontal drilling, we can have a flexibility. It's limited, but we still have a little more flexibility on where we can put a location. We can be careful of some of your, sensitive receptors, such as, your birds, your wildlife, in spill prevention, stormwater drainage. You can look at your site and see how your operations are going to affect the land and counter them with some strategic planning. You can, hopefully move the wells from being on a high sloped area to more level terrain. You can reduce the amount of cut and fill that you need on a location. Not in everyone, but horizontal drilling has given us more flexibility. It's important with the site planning to do a full-on site assessment, and you identify, like I said, those receptors, and then you can account for them. And also, especially in areas where there is, there's high occupancy. We are in areas that's heavily used. It's not kind of the barren lands of some of our operations. You have to look at what current and future uses are. One we have a lot of issues with in the counties we operate is hunting. And you can see the gentleman here, we actually have to end up dressing in hunter gear, and we plan our operations around it. We don't operate, noisy equipment during the morning hours, and you just have to be good neighbors. And in all honesty, if you've ever tried to talk to any of our operators during hunting season, we are generally very short-staffed because it's our guys that are actually out there in the morning. So. Another issue with site selection beyond the exact site of your well locations are the roads to get there. We use a lot of existing roads out here because they're already in place, but they're not necessarily ready for our level, for the traffic, for the weight of equipment. And so we have seen some impacts. These are just some examples from the Pennsylvania area of roads that we've now actually gone in and repaired to bring them up to a level that, well, it's better for everyone and it allows our operations, but you need to be very aware of what the impacts may be, what you may need to do to address them, and also the travel restrictions with weather. This was a huge one if you want to take it out to the Bakken this year in North Dakota. Unseen precipitation levels, they just had roads caving in, sloughing off into drainages simply because of precipitation. And what it did was shut down a lot of the truck traffic. They had rigs stranded because you could not physically move them anymore. And so you really have to be aware and plan accordingly. And think on a more, instead of a well by well, you think of a play basis and see how your operations and how you can plan for it. And Brian hit a few of these earlier, but there are some things just very basic that you can do to minimize your road impacts. Not just impacts on the road, but impacts from the use of the road on the communities. And it's avoidance of peak traffic hours, recognizing quiet periods in a community, coordination with, all of your agencies and highway departments. And also, if we actually do have to close a road, or if you're moving equipment that's going to cause delays, public notice of it. That goes back to those stakeholder meetings, the engagement. The more you can discuss, the more everyone is aware of, the less impact everyone will feel. Another issue can be noise. The nice thing with hydraulic fracturing, it's a very short-term process. We have some that are literally hours to a couple of days. So the impact itself is not that great, but we can still take steps to help relieve it even further. If you have off-road parking, truly distance is the best noise mitigation. So if you can site your equipment away from, say, whatever type of receptor, a house or any kind of community, a park, wherever it may be that you are next to. The example here, it's just some straw bales around the equipment. It's just a little bit of a noise barrier, but it does really help. And then if you do have to do noisy operations, if you can keep them to maybe the daylight hours, again, just lessening any kind of burden. As I said, it's still a very short-term activity, so it's not an ongoing issue, but any reduction is a good reduction. So another aspect is the actual management of fluids, and we heard Ron this morning talk about what kind of fluids we needed for fracturing, and so this is really, okay, now that we have them, what do we do with them? And we have to look for our additives beyond just what is best for downhole now. We have to take into account, how do we handle it on the surface? The impacts, it seems, from fracturing, the concerns really are not downhole. They are more how we handle our surface aspects. And so, how do we store them? Are there better ways to store them? Are there better chemicals to be stored? Are the options out there? How do they actually impact the recycling of our water? Is there an additive, alternative we could utilize that would allow for better recycling? And how do they impact our preferred disposal method? And then just basically greener, and I use the quotes because the term is so vague and is thrown out so often that it's, everyone has a slightly different definition, but truly, are there better alternatives? Working with the service providers, Ron showed their little Halliburton ranking, but the service providers are starting to really kind of put a better perspective for the operators on what their options are from a chemical standpoint, so we need to continue that progress. Operators and all field personnel also training, training, understand what the chemicals were going to be utilized, know how to properly handle them, and also, in the case that something happens, know what the emergency response procedures are, know how to handle it so it can stop and not become an issue. And as always be in compliance. We have to make sure, as good stewards, we have to follow all the regulations. We work very closely with our permitting agencies. They do a very good job, and we need to make sure that we hold our end of the bargain up just as they hold theirs. Disclosure of fluids. This is where I spend most of my time anymore on. But in today's political atmosphere, disclosure is mandatory of what we put down. It's a level of, what is truly meaningful disclosure, though? We see, every operator, every press, everything gets thrown around as different levels and different terms defining it. The one that in the API document we've really got behind is frac focus, and it is, your OSHA material safety data sheet chemicals. So these are ones that have been identified as direct contact with, the public safety, somebody directly in contact with that chemical. That's what we need to know about. And also we go into, what is the chemical, specific information about it, and also to put it in context. So everyone can see that, we may use an additive, but on the whole fluid, it's 1,000th or even less of a % of what that fluid is. So really getting everyone to understand what our fluid looks like when it goes down hole. And then, excuse me, Frac Focus also does an excellent job on your non-industry educational material. Being in oil and gas, we all end up speaking in a jargon that is oil and gas, and we don't even recognize it. And so Frac Focus, who is there, it's two different agencies, it's IOGCC and the Groundwater Protection Council that have come together. They are not oil and gas, they're actually more groundwater focused and then state focused, but they put together the educational material so that it could get out to the general public in a non-oil and gas verbiage and hopefully provide some of this key educational material that we are struggling with and get everyone's understanding of what hydraulic fracturing is and the fluids in it really up onto discussion levels. And then this also, we've seen several state agencies have already begun adopting Frac Focus as their mandatory disclosure, and several more are considering it. So the transport of fluids, this is very critical. Again, always be in compliance, but a useful tool that has started to being implemented is GPS units on vehicles. Anadarko undertook, I call it Command Central, but we have, a whole dispatch system. All of our trucks are tracked with GPS, and this allows excellent staging. No longer do you have long truck lines waiting, to be filled up and moved off site. We only have trucks there when they're needed. This eliminates a lot of congestion on the roads. It also provides a wonderful safety tool. We can make sure that the trucks are going the correct speed limits. They're following designated routes. You can easily reroute them if necessary due to a change in road conditions or a weather issue. It's much easier and it's much safer and it's efficient. Before moving any fluids, though, you need to make sure that all of the equipment has been inspected for leaks, any kind of compromise in integrity. You want to make sure all of the valves are properly sealed, closed. And you can engage on the fluids, engage with your landowner, see if there's any kind of beneficial uses for it. If they have a pond, see what kind of working, instead of moving maybe fresh water, maybe the landowner would like that, or, can you build an impoundment for them, or, it's just that open dialogue. And in certain areas, it was mentioned, temporary pipelines can be utilized to move water around. This is not feasible in all areas and not in all phases of development, but it can be very useful. And so this is one where Brian kind of stole my thunder from earlier, but the Utah example that he has, the Anadarko in Utah has done a multiple staging. We actually get the majority of our flow back from our fracking, and we utilize all of it. So we have 100% recycle out there, as well as in the Marcellus. But it's through this system that we can network it very efficiently to all of our systems, and it has reduced, truck traffic, which is air emissions, and we've seen wonderful benefits from this. Now, one difference is there we actually do get flow back. So these lines transport, actual produced fluids. The ones in Pennsylvania, we don't have as much flow back. We generally truck those still, but you can use the temporary lines for fresh water. It's just a network of systems. With temporary lines, you need to make sure you do have quality control on it. These are just some examples of what we do to make sure that the lines are intact, that they're safe, that they're not going to have an issue. We run them along existing rights-of-way, so you're not having new disturbance. You pressure test them before and after, clean them. It's just your basic operator. Spill prevention. Sorry I glossed over that. We had already kind of heard on it. Spill prevention is another key issue with surface impacts. And this is, again, proper planning and training are really the key to prevention. In areas, it may be beneficial to develop specific plans for the sites or for the area if necessary, going into not only what measures will be in place, but in the event of a spill, how will you respond to it, having your policies and procedures for fluid transfer to minimize the potential of a spill. A couple initiatives that Anadarko's kind of gone into are the no spill zone and eyes on, and they're just little things. They're little stickers, even we put them around that reference back to the program, but it's just little reminders for everyone to keep your focus sharp and look for ways to minimize spills. Another issue, a lot of times we think, our safety, our tailgate meetings, they do focus on safety, but you can expand them to include more of the environmental side of things and discuss, what you're going to be doing that day and how to minimize, make sure you check if you're going to be unloading things, just reference, check the valves, make sure they're closed, or, remove the ability to open the valves, there's lots of little things, and so if you include that in tailgate meetings, you can just get your awareness back up and keep it fresh in everyone's mind. And also in sensitive areas, you may want to think about going beyond just your standard spill containment and put more in place if necessary. One of our examples is on our frac jobs, we line the entire pad. Is this really necessary? In some areas we found that with, near creeks or something, to make sure that in the event of an issue, we could stop it before it actually left site. We found that lining was a wonderful alternative. And so the entire location, it's barriers, routine visual inspections. You look for repair, replace capability on site. So when you do the inspection, it's not just noted in a book. You can address it right then before it ever becomes an issue. The non-fresh water is always stored within the tanks on site. And then we even locate, like I said, this document kind of goes beyond just fracturing, but we even locate our tank berries lined containment. So just a little beyond what is a typical practice. Another issue with fluid management is on-site handling, and you have to look at beyond just transporting your chemicals and needing to look at everything. It's on site. You look at your equipment, proper maintenance, address leaks as soon as they're detected. Instead of having little things that can go big, address the little things and they never become an issue. It's also, you can With our locations and the size of them being on pads, you can kind of vary a little bit some of your equipment. We've actually found that staging tanks at different levels, this reduces the amount of size necessary on that pad, which can also reduce the burden, just the impacts of trucking to that location if you can have it at multiple locations, and then using the temporary lines. Also, when you have, with your loading things, you put a little extra, again, it comes back to spills. All of these are really tied together. But the loading and unloading racks with drip containment, proper fencing to keep, our activities are fascinating. They're interesting. The equipment is fun. And so, you put fencing up, keep wildlife, keep, curiosity out and keep it safe for everyone. We also, on any of our pits, you always make sure to do that from a safety standpoint. So water management, pits and impoundments, like I said, pits, when they're constructed properly, they're an extremely useful tool in water handling. This is an example, the top left, or top right is an example of an Anadarko impoundment, similar to what we heard earlier. It's 360,000 barrels of fresh water, and it allows a networking system of temporary lines. It allows a reduction in our pad size necessary, because instead of trying to store them in tanks on site, we can use the lines to run there. And with using those lines, this is just an example that we calculated off, but for one of our pads, roughly it's 40 to 50,000 truckloads of water that we no longer need to haul by utilizing pits and impoundments. So they really are a beneficial, and not only are they better for the environment, but they can be very economically successful. Stormwater. It's a key one. As I said, it's part of your site planning. You need to look at what you can do in the event of stormwater, how you can rearrange your site to really allow for the, prevention, keep the stormwater forever entering your location. Pennsylvania itself has quite stringent stormwater requirements, but also outside of the Marcellus, we have the RAPs, the reasonable and prudent practices for stabilization, that really goes into what the best measurements are used on site, but it's not enough to just put them in place. You have to make sure you stay on top of it and maintain them properly, inspect them, truly make sure that they are working. I don't know how many times you drive on the roads and you look at just in construction areas, not oil and gas, just general stormwater, and the majority of the time it seems that, while they might have been put in place properly, they haven't been maintained, and therefore they're no longer really that useful. So as much as it is to maintain, it's just as important to maintain as it is to implement. Another with maintaining beyond just stormwater, but your facilities, your equipment, the saying is always kind of put your best foot forward, make sure everything looks nice. This one's kind of your housekeeping aspect of it. We are in an area, there's lots of people present, there's lots of eyes on operations, and so just basic general housekeeping. It also reduces safety issues when sites are cleaned up, so there's more than just a visual benefit to it. There's truly safety and health benefits. Always utilize equipment designed for the conditions that the well's going to be seeing, and designed to address non-operational issues such as weather. We've seen this in some of the other areas, especially out west in Wyoming, where you get, feet to feet and then blowing snow. Design your equipment to be able to handle that and the operational issues that may come about that of, driving without, the equipment gets buried easily. And then always inspect and test your piping systems to verify their integrity. And I would just want to challenge that, with operators, not only do we actually, we work here, but this is the same area that we live in, we play in. We want to keep things as pristine as possible because it's our backyard that we're enjoying. And so, go out there. This is an example of going beyond just, basic well site to being just a good operator, a good neighbor, I should say. And, this was one example of out doing creek restoration, but most companies have examples of projects together. This allows team building, which is, fun on its own, but it also just raises the awareness that we are in the community to be good neighbors. We're not, yes, we make money, but our impact is to really be there, exist, live, and have a wonderful time.